For the past several months, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania has been hyped by Disney and Marvel as the most important movie to the MCU since Endgame. They were desperate to try to get people out to the theaters. And despite the glowing headlines from so many of the mainstream news sources, the reality is that they should be very, very worried about the MCU, and they should be panicking over the Ant-Man 3 box office because this opening weekend does not bode well for them in the future. And if this thing tracks the same way that every other Marvel movie has the past several years, this could be a movie that doesn't make its money back, that struggles to even hit $600 million. And at the end of the day, if that happens, that would spell disaster for Kevin Feige and for Marvel Studios. And some people are even waking up to that fact and trying to acknowledge it while still trying to soften the blow for woke Hollywood. Ant-Man 3 box office shows the limits of post-Endgame Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, although this article is written from the perspective of, hey, listen, it's never going to be the good old days, but hey, you can still make several $100 million box office numbers. The problem is with the budget that Marvel's using for not just this movie, but nearly all these other movies that they're putting out, when it costs that much to make these things, you're not going to be able to make your money back if you're doing things like this. If you have box office results like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And again, what did we see? A $225 million global opening. Not only is that $75 million less than what you got from Thor: Love and Thunder several months ago, but this also had a Chinese release. They were expecting $60 million in China, and they didn't get that. They got less than $20 million opening weekend in China. In fact, just a few days before this release, this was what they thought they'd make. $280 million global opening. That was the projection. And somehow right now, this isn't the biggest headline. This is what it should be. That Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania came in nearly $60 million underneath what it was projected to make globally, with a $105 million domestic opening and around a $121 million international opening. Sad and pathetic compared to where they expected to be. Paul Rudd's charm overcame mixed reviews, but the poor opening in China means global totals for most MCU films will be diminished. Oh, okay. Once again, using the China excuse, guess what? This is the reality. Marvel movies are not making money in China. They weren't getting released in China for a while, and now even that they are, people just aren't interested in them anymore. That is a problem. You can't just use that as an excuse. The same way they've used COVID as an excuse year after year, even when in reality, once we saw Spider-Man No Way Home hit almost $2 billion, no longer should you consider that a viable excuse. Even as the grumblings that the MCU's past its prime have gotten louder, the opening weekend have shown Hollywood's top franchise is still a dependable hit machine. Well, I disagree because this movie is going to struggle to make money. I guess it depends how you define hit. If you define hit as can make several $100 million at a box office, okay. But if you define hit as something that will actually make money, then that's a different story. At the same time, the sub-billion-dollar global totals MCU films have earned the past year are likely to be the norm for the new movie's poor Chinese launch if it's a sign of things to come. How far Ant-Man 3 goes over the next month will have a lot to say about Marvel's ability to create charming superheroes that audiences want to see over and over again, regardless of critics' reviews. Quantumania, and we know it's garnered different scores from the audience, from the critics, all of these things. But they've earned Marvel its fifth straight $100+ million domestic launch with a $105 million 3-day and $120 million 4-day launch, beating the $71 million opening of Eternals and the $75.8 million opening of Ant-Man and the Wasp. And this is what everybody's coming back to. The same thing they did with Thor: Love and Thunder. Hey guys, it's the biggest Ant-Man launch ever. It beat the other ones. The same way they did with Thor: Love and Thunder, comparing it to Ragnarok. When in reality, you gotta be considering all the things that work. The fact that the budget's way bigger for this movie, just like it was for Thor: Love and Thunder. The fact that tickets cost way more than they did back then. You wanna know a sad reality that none of these people have actually spoke about? Then when you look at Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and I have some numbers here that can actually show something, the average ticket price for Ant-Man 3 was $13.98 across the globe opening weekend. Or across the United States opening weekend. We'll just think about that. Across the United States opening weekend, $13.98. If we go just by the average ticket price for the year 2018 when Ant-Man and the Wasp was released, we can do some quick math, can't we? I think we can figure that out, right? If we have 105 million, that's what the domestic opening was for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Let's divide that by the average ticket price, 13.98. 7,500,000 people. 7.5 million people went to go see this here in the United States over the weekend. That's what it averages out to. What if we look at Ant-Man and the Wasp? What did that do opening weekend? 75, right? 75 million? Well, we can do that. 75 million divided by, what was that average ticket price? $9.11. 8.2. More people went to see Ant-Man and the Wasp than they did Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Despite all this buildup, despite Phase 5 of the MCU, oh, incredible. This is the reality that people aren't telling you. When you look at the box office inflation that's going on right now, both just inflation in general and with the ticket prices, this should be the fear. This should be the panic for Marvel, that fewer people went to see Ant-Man Quantumania than they did to see Ant-Man and the Wasp 5 years ago. And now, even some people, while still trying to protect this movie, are admitting that if it goes down this path, it might not hit $600 million. Or more foreboding side for the film's global box office potential is the poor $19 million in China, more than 70% below the $66 million opening by Ant-Man and the Wasp in July 2018. It's very likely to de facto blackout Chinese officials put on Marvel, blah, blah, blah. Yes, more excuses about why it's not making money in China. At the same time, it's possible the waning interest spreads to many other Hollywood franchises. While Avatar: The Way of Water made $250 million there, few other films have received the releases. This is when they actually get into the reality, when reality sets in for Marvel. So where does that leave the box office outlook for Ant-Man 3? If we use domestic performance of Thor: Love and Thunder as a comparison point, that film opened to $144 million, finished with $343 million, then Quantumania should be able to at least reach $225 million, putting it past the unadjusted total of Ant-Man and the Wasp. But what about the global total? It's likely that a higher domestic total compared to Ant-Man and the Wasp will be counterbalanced by a much lower Chinese total. The rest of the international market seeing rough numbers consistent with Ant-Man and the Wasp, with 102 this weekend compared to 98 million opening weekend of Wasp. That leaves Quantumania with a global total in the $600 million range. Just for you keeping score, that would be less than Ant-Man and the Wasp from 5 years ago if it ended with $600 million. Also, with the $200 million budget, with a massive marketing budget that included a Super Bowl ad, $600 million is the break-even point for this movie. Everywhere you look, no matter how anybody tries to spin it, as soon as they accept the reality of this is bad for Marvel. This is bad for the MCU. This very well could be a movie that loses money for Disney, that is hyped as, oh, incredible, the most important movie since Endgame. And not even as many people came out to see it as came out to see Ant-Man and the Wasp all the way back in 2018. The news doesn't get much worse than this. And despite the media doing their best to not talk about this, to not talk about how fewer people are actually going to see this movie, the numbers are right there for everybody to see. Ant-Man and the Wasp opening weekend has been a disaster for Marvel, and it's not even close. You can't even pretend like it's not, despite everybody trying to. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Smash a like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, share this video out there, and I'll talk to you later.